Okay, so this is the Carrageenan Kappa film recipe, CA03, and we're just mixing half the amount that's in the Materium recipe just to fill one sheet. So that's 175 millilitres of water. It can be distilled water, but tap water seems to work just as well. We've got this here on a little mixing station, some digital scales to weigh out. We're going to have 8 grams of the Carrageenan Kappa, which comes from the processed seaweed, and then later on we'll add a gram of spirulina algae that's been dried, and then we'll just go through that process. So to start off, I tend to warm up the water. It just helps mixing a little bit, so that can be warming up while we're weighing out our sort of powdered materials. So these are quite cheap scales off eBay. Carrageenan Kappa, also from eBay. All the recipes kind of on the website if you want to have a look. But we're just going to weigh out 8 grams here. So 2, 4, 6, 7. Just usually do a little bit over, just because you tend to lose some as you're adding it, at least the way I'm doing it here. Okay, so that's starting to warm up. So this is just a cheap sort of camping hot plate, mains powered. This is a 500ml borosilicate glass flask. They're quite sort of easy to get hold of, but they just mean that they can cope with being on a hot plate like this without cracking. So don't use any other glass. You need this kind of borosilicate glass because it's got that kind of, it's rated for taking quite a fair bit of heat. I'm just warming this up to maybe body temperature, but not being too specific about it. So I'm going to put that to one side, quickly add some of the spirulina. So really the algae is only to kind of colour the plastic. We're going to be actually looking at some algae under the microscope in the workshop. So I'm just going to add maybe half a gram. There we go. So that's half a gram. That gets added last. So we'll put that to one side. So that's warm enough now. And we'll start the stirring. Again, all the workshop materials basically come from eBay, so this little stir is really useful. And you just gradually add the powder until it's completely, just turn that for a sec. You just add the powder until gradually, until it's completely mixed in. So usually just a kind of spoon or knife at a time tends to sort of mix it. So we'll just mix that now until it's totally kind of uniform. So the reason we're only doing one sheet at a time is because what I've found is the mix, because you kind of heat it up to 70 degrees, which we'll go through in a minute, but then as soon as the heat's off, it can sort of set quite quickly. So really for this setup, just pouring it a sheet at a time seems to work best. It's got our most consistent results. So there probably is a faster way of doing larger amounts, but I found this kind of works quite well. You can kind of, in a few hours, you can fill up 4 sheets and then get it in the food dehydrator, these trays, and then we've been getting quite a sort of consistent kind of material out of that. If you don't have one of these stirrer setups, you can sort of do it by hand or with a stirrer, but this is just a lot quicker. And just that slightly raising the temperature does help it mix in a little bit. So again, this is just our 175 ml of water, and then the Carrageenan Kappa powder, which is like a food grade, it's like a food additive that's easily available. Just keep adding that until it's mixed in. Losing maybe some of the powder on the sides of the flask, but you can sort of capture them afterwards. So you could probably do this in a slightly more accurate way, but it's kind of enough to get the ratio of materials right. So in a minute, I'm going to put this onto the hot plate again, but I'm actually going to mix it in this saucepan. It's just a lot easier and it's a lot safer because it's got a wooden handle, so make sure you get sort of an insulated handle of some kind, and then the saucepan, just keep it for all your plastic cooking. Nothing we're using is toxic in any way, but it's just a lot easier if you just keep it separate from any food stuff. So I'm going to transfer this into that plate now, because it's mixed quite a good consistency. And you can just sort of, at the end, the good thing about flasks is that you can sort of just sort of mix them without them spilling over the top. So they are worth getting hold of. So I'm going to put that into the pan. Turn the mixer off. It's done. So if there's any powder still left, you can just use a sort of heat-proof spatula to mix it up. There's a few bits that haven't quite mixed. Just mix off the side. probably spend a bit more time mixing, but we've just kind of done it quite quickly for this demo. They're more or less homogeneous now, the two powder and the water. Okay, so at this point I tend to put a thermometer in. I mean, ideally like an old analog thermometer, like kitchen cooking thermometer, works really well. And what we're going to do is, once this is nice and mixed, we're going to add 2 millilitres of glycerol. So this is the glycerol, obviously also from eBay. And then we've got just a standard syringe, measure out 2 ml, maybe a little bit because you tend to lose a little bit in the syringe. Then we're just going to add that to the mix. This thermometer is quite good because it kind of mixes as well as measures the temperature, so it's been really handy, that. And it's nearly at 60. So for this recipe, you want to be mixing your glycerol in, the water and Kappa powder, and then you want to heat this up to about 70 degrees. When it hits 70, you can take it off the heat, stir it a little bit more, and it's at that point we add the algae or any other colourant you want to experiment with. You can feel once the glycerol's in, it starts to stiffen up. So if you hit 70, it's not quite there. You kind of need to make it peak at 70 and then it can fall again. Nearly. That's it, it's hit 70 now. So we can turn the heat off, mix it a little bit longer, maybe for another 30 seconds or so. Once it's out of the pan and in the tray, it kind of sets quite quickly. The other thing I've noticed is the acrylic tends to bend upwards as soon as you put heat on it. So what I find is that I pour it very quickly into the tray, and then once push down to sort of let it settle. I'll do that in a moment. So I'm going to add that algae, which we measured out before. So this is just 0.5 gram. Just mix it up with your spatula. Go. Now that's just about ready to pour now. It's up to you how much you want to mix in the colourant. I sort of quite like having it clumped together in that way. It's quite a nice thing. Okay, you can see it's on the sides, it's already setting. So, quick pour. Take your spatula to just spread out the mix a little bit. You've got to act fairly quickly because it's already sort of setting. my sheets anyway, I've tried to, I'm after most consistency on these two sort of panels on the left and the right. So if you run out, you can sort of take some from the middle. As you can see, that's really set very quickly. It's not bowed too much. If you put it in hotter, the sort of bending of the acrylics gets quite extreme, so it's up to you really how you want to do it. And that's the basics of the cook, and then this goes stacked up in the dehydrator, and then we'll run it for we've been using 10 hours, and then with 8 hours we found that a few of the sheets hadn't fully dehydrated, so there was some mould when we opened it up this morning. So I think 10 hours seems to be the sort of minimum you need. And I might actually up this one to 11 hours just to see if that's more like the consistency we got in the very first batch. Okay, yeah, so generally I would just hold down the middle of the plate while it evens out. It's always best to have like maybe a spirit level on wherever you're working. Just check your dehydrators on the level. But after maybe about 10 minutes, it's kind of set in the position it's going to be set. Yeah, so that's it. All ready.